Ferrari arrives in Bahrain with the same power unit used in Barcelona, and this is the first positive signal from the tests in Bahrain that will start tomorrow and continue until Friday. We need to hear statements from Ferrari insiders, so let's take a look at the driver lineup and which drivers will be on track on which day. We also need to see statements from Fernando Alonso, who is already having some disagreements with Honda because he says the power unit is a bit behind their expectations. We need to hear from Adrian Newey regarding the power units and the Mercedes engine. And finally, we need to put a pin in this issue because Nikolas Tombazis has made some comments about it. And the very last thing, but the most important today, is to see the condition of Kimi Antonelli and what happened to the Italian driver. That said, let's get started. No safety unit, no preventive rotations. The Ferrari SF26 and Sakhir will be equipped exactly with the engine from the shakedown in Catalonia. Why? Because in Maranello, they want to fully understand the real potential of the 0676 engine, not only in terms of performance, but especially in terms of durability and reliability under completely different conditions compared to Barcelona. Barcelona was a first step, mild climate, controlled loads, methodical work. Bahrain is a whole different story. It's hotter, the asphalt is more aggressive, thermal stress is much higher. This is where an engine really shows if it was built well or if it has weaknesses. And indeed, Ferrari's goal is very clear: to push the same engine throughout the entire winter preparation. If the plans are respected, Maranello could close the pre-season tests with just one power unit, which is not trivial at all considering the regulatory context. Starting in 2026, everything changes, with the new power units being split 50% internal combustion engine and 50% electric motor. The FIA has also imposed a change in philosophy regarding durability, reducing the number of power units from 4 to 3 for the entire season. In practical terms, each engine will need to cover 8 Grand Prix, not 6 anymore. And it's clear that in a championship with 24 races plus 6 sprints, reliability is no longer a secondary issue. It's a decisive factor. If you get the design wrong, you won't recover, and if you break down, it will be costly. This is precisely why Ferrari wants answers now, immediately, in Bahrain. They need to understand if the engine 0676 can withstand the pressure, if the thermal management is solid, and if the compromise between performance and durability is right. But Bahrain is not only important for the track, it is here that the F1 Commission is expected to meet to discuss one of the most delicate issues at the start of 2026. That is, the checks on the compression ratio of the power units. The proposal from the Power Unit Advisory Committee is clear: verify the compression ratio not cold, but hot. Behind this request is a united front of manufacturers, including Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull powertrains, who want to definitively resolve the issue related to Mercedes' famous micro-combustion chamber. The point is that in the F1 Commission, not only the engine manufacturers vote, but also the teams. And here, the balances can change because it is by no means certain that the proposal will pass, especially considering that in the past, the Mercedes solution had received technical approval. The role of the FIA will be central. A clear decision now would help avoid protests, controversies, and complaints right after the first race in Australia. It would be the best way to kick off the 26th World Cup without shadows. But returning to Ferrari, the message coming from the sports management is very simple. Before the controversies, before the politics, before the power games, it's important to understand the engine. And in the 3 days in Bahrain, the absolute priority will be one: to discover who the power unit 0676 really is. For everything else, for now, it can wait. Do you see what I told you? It's very important because in the Bahrain tests, Ferrari will be retesting the engine that it has already tested in Barcelona under completely different conditions. Perhaps even more favorable, if we want, because the environmental conditions were suited to the Ferrari engine and all the other engines. While in Bahrain, we will see, and they will actually test the conditions in which a Formula 1 engine operates. And so we will see if the Ferrari engine is really reliable, because it's easy to go fast when the environmental conditions are cold. It is much more difficult to perform consistently at that pace and obviously with high performance when the conditions are those of Bahrain, which we will also see during the season. So attention to the Ferrari engine. If it continues to perform well and be reliable even in tests in Bahrain, then we can confirm Ferrari's reliability for this year. Otherwise, questions will start to arise, and thus the first inquiries. However, this is already a positive factor. Transitioning from Barcelona to Bahrain with the same engine is something positive for Ferrari. On the contrary, Honda has already encountered initial problems. In fact, the 2.6 for Aston Martin is not just a new season. It is the beginning of a completely new project, perhaps the most ambitious in its recent history. New power unit, new technical philosophy, and Honda as the exclusive partner with Adrian Newey at the helm of the design front. On paper, all of this is what Fernando Alonso has always sought, but reality, at least for now, is much more complex. In fact, Alonso does not hide. He is enthusiastic, yes, but also extremely clear-headed. He knows very well that this project does not start with an advantage. In fact, it already comes with a weight on its shoulders. 4 months lost at the beginning of 2025 due to calibration issues with the wind tunnel, a delay that has dragged on until the first kilometers on the track. And indeed, Barcelona was not a real test for Aston Martin. It was more or less a shakedown. The car arrived late, some components literally landed by plane on Wednesday evening, and the schedule was thrown into disarray. No intense simulations, no real references, just constant speed runs on the straights. To avoid stressing the mechanics, which are still to be understood, Alonso made it clear, in Barcelona we were not pushing, we were not looking for the limit. We were just starting the first meters of a project that was not yet ready. And that's why Bahrain becomes crucial, because that's where Aston Martin really begins testing. The goal is simple: to catch up on the kilometers compared to the competitors, gather data, and start to understand the car as a whole. From comfort in the cockpit to seat position to more serious issues like cooling, vibrations, and system integration. All very normal things when starting from scratch, but they clearly indicate how much work is still ahead. Then there's the big unknown, which is the Honda power unit. Alonso doesn't go into details, but he doesn't deny the reality. The information he has is the same as what is circulating outside. In fact, Honda is slightly behind, especially on the thermal part of the engine. And in a new regulation where 50% of the power comes from the electric side, this matters. But here comes into play Alonso's philosophy, which he himself defines as a long game. In fact, according to Fernando, this will not be a season decided in the early races unless a small dominion emerges right away. The 2026 championship will be in constant motion. Every track could change the game. Every update could overturn the balance of power. Yes, the power unit is fundamental, but precisely because of its complexity, development times are long. It's not guaranteed that any potential solutions will arrive immediately. For this reason, Alonso is particularly focused on the second half of the year. There, according to him, the true value of the season will be determined. When the projects are mature, when aerodynamic developments start to make a difference, and when teams have truly understood how to exploit these new cars. And this is also why Fernando Alonso is not worried about the Bahrain or the early races. He knows that the pace of development will be very high for everyone and that no one can afford to stand still. However, there is another huge issue in parallel: his future. In fact, Alonso's contract expires at the end of the season, and he knows it. He would like to wait, buy time, arrive in September with as many elements as possible to decide whether to continue or stop. Not only based on performance, but also on how he feels physically and mentally, the weight of travel, marketing, everything that revolves around Formula One. The problem is that this conflicts with the team's needs. Aston Martin cannot afford to wait too long without knowing whether their key driver will stay or not. Alonso is aware of the pressure that will come and knows that sooner or later he will have to choose. But one thing is clear: he wants to see how far this project can go. He wants to understand if, with New York and Honda, Aston Martin can grow and become something more. For Fernando, 2026 is a gamble, not a promise, not an illusion. A clear-headed gamble. Difficult, but perhaps the last real opportunity to make sense of everything that comes after. And as Fernando Alonso himself said, he is optimistic about the future. He says this is the beginning of a good future for Aston Martin. It's a positive first step, the arrival of Adrian Newey, the building of a team based on Honda, on Aramco, and Aston Martin itself. So, an important triptych that may face initial problems. They started late with the development of the Honda power unit, and I warned you that Aston Martin's only Achilles heel could indeed be the Honda power unit. And that will be the case in the early races for sure. However, they will have room to recover because the infrastructure is there. As Adrian Newey also said, it is among the best in the circus. Aston Martin's infrastructure is new and has cutting-edge systems. And in addition, the team is cohesive, compact, has Fernando Alonso, a two-time world champion, and can push the car to its limit. We obviously need to see the future of the Spanish driver, as there are already rumors saying that Oscar Piastri could leave McLaren if he doesn't receive the necessary trust in the walking team to go to Aston Martin. But for now, these remain just rumors, like those about Charles Leclerc. If Ferrari doesn't perform well, Leclerc could go to Aston Martin. There is a clause that states Leclerc has the first 4 to 5 months at Ferrari to assess his future. Of course, there is his manager, Nikolas Tombazis, who represents Leclerc and is also looking for other teams where the Monegasque could go. However, for now, Leclerc is a Ferrari man, just as Piastri is a McLaren man. So for now, the market remains still. But there will definitely be movements after the first 4 or 5 races of the championship. Adrian Newey is not one to easily let his emotions show, and that's why, when you hear him speak like this, you understand that for Aston Martin, this project is something different. The debut of the AMR26 was not just the first day of a new car, it was the culmination of a race against time, filled with long nights, accelerated decisions, and inevitable compromises. Newey tells it without filters. The car seen in Barcelona, all black, was not a stylistic choice. There simply wasn't time to paint it. The goal was singular: to get it on the track, to make it run, and to immediately discover the teething problems before the real tests in Bahrain. That moment for him and Lawrence Stroll was full of meaning. When Lance emerged from the garage, Newey and Stroll were side by side in the pit lane, and for a moment Newey says they were both almost on the verge of tears, because getting there was not a given. It has been a long, emotional journey, built on passion and hard work. The team has literally performed miracles. Procedures were accelerated, steps skipped, decisions made in deviation from standard processes just to seize the opportunity to turn. Not to seek performance, but to understand the machine. And this is where Newey, whom everyone knows, comes into play. The visionary, the one who, according to many, sees the air before a single-seater even exists. However, he downplays everything. He doesn't see the air, obviously. He doesn't see the airflow as it is, but he tries to imagine how the flow moves, how it might behave. Today, with powerful tools like CFD, that allow for visualizing flows on the screen in a way that is infinitely more precise than in the past, when smoke, foam, and wool threads were used in the wind tunnel. But there is a key concept that Newey reiterates. CFD and the wind tunnel tell you what is happening now, not what will happen next. The real work lies in taking those insights and transforming them into the next idea, always one step ahead. And this is where the philosophy of the Aston Martin AMR26 was born, because Newey explains that everything took shape during his gardening leave period. In the spring of 2024, he was out of Formula One. But with the new regulations already defined in his mind, he started thinking from the fundamental principles. What do these rules aim to achieve? What is the most logical, cleanest, and most effective solution? When he officially joined Aston Martin on March 2nd, 2025, that philosophy was shared with aerodynamicists and designers, and that's where the confirmation came. Everyone agreed. That was the path to follow. Newey makes it clear. Every major regulatory change is a huge opportunity. We already saw it in 2022, when at first there were very different interpretations, and then over time, one solution emerged as the most correct, leading everyone to converge. especially from 2024 onwards, and 2026 will be no exception. For this reason, one should not be deluded by looking at today's car. The Aston Martin we see in Bahrain will already be different from the one we will see later on in the season, and the one that will race in Melbourne will be even more different. In short, according to Newey, the development will be huge and continuous. The car will change throughout the season, and it's not hard to imagine that the one in Abu Dhabi will be almost another car compared to the beginning of the year. Then there's the issue of close races, of the possibility of slipstreaming. In fact, Newey recalls that in 2022 the goal was the same: facilitating overtakes. At first, it seemed to work. Then, over time, the effect diminished, and something similar could happen now as well. Finally, the heart of the project is the new factory in Silverstone. The Aston Martin AMR 26 is the first single-seater entirely designed and built there. For Newey, the value is not just technical, it's human. It's a beautiful environment to work in, and it's essential when you spend 12 hours a day or more in the factory. The structure is centralized. It promotes collaboration. It puts people in a position to work better. And yes, the facilities are extraordinary. Newey has no doubts. Thanks to the vision and investments of Lawrence Stroll, Aston Martin now has the best structure in Formula One. But he immediately adds one fundamental thing. It won't be enough to have the best building. What matters is who fills it, and how those people work together. And that's where Newey says Aston Martin is making the most important progress. The Aston Martin AMR 26 is not a promise. It's a starting point. The real journey is what really matters, and it starts now. When Newey resigned from Red Bull, he immediately started thinking about the new regulations, how to devise a plan to be competitive with the new team he then debuted with on March 2, 2025. When he first stepped into Aston Martin, he already had clear ideas in mind about what the project to bring to Lawrence Stroll's car was, and this is the most interesting thing he said in the Aston Martin presentation. Newey was already clear on how to develop this Aston Martin AMR 26, which is a first step and the start of a project that is more ambitious, and it aims, as Lance Stroll himself also said, to win races, win titles, even in the coming years. So we will see a bit how Aston Martin performs. The fact is that a crucial point is the cohesion work that takes place in the factory. Lawrence Stroll is doing his best to bring in the right people to work on the project. The work environment is appreciated by Adrian Newey, and this is a fundamental thing. When you spend 12 hours a day in the factory, it is important that you feel good in the work environment, and that is present. Now, however, we need to see a small detail, because we need to clarify the compression ratio of the Mercedes engine. We said that there was a discussion of the power unit advisory with MIDI, but we need to hear the words of Nikolas Tombazis, head of the FIA, because he has taken a stance on the matter. The compression ratio that increases when the engine is hot. It is one of the gray areas that risks exploding, a championship before it even starts. Some say it is written in the regulations, that it must be respected. Others say it is a gray area that can instead be exploited. The problem arises from a decision made in the past within the FIA itself. Someone had given the green light to a technical solution, the famous combustion microcamera, which allows for a hot engine to go from a nominal compression ratio of 16:1 to higher values, up to 18:1. Formally, everything is regular, but substantially much less so. Now the FIA finds itself in a dead end. Because at the Power Unit Advisory Committee table, a clear majority has been created. Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull want to close this regulatory loophole, while Mercedes does not, and the clash is total. Tombazis clearly states this in a video published by the FIA. This new regulation is not just a challenge for the teams, but also for the federation. There are new parameters to check, new forms of compliance to ensure. It is a learning process for everyone. But then comes the key point, the one that changes everything. Tombazis admits that engineers, as always, push to seek advantages. And this is exactly how someone found a way to raise the engine's compression ratio when hot. And this is precisely the ongoing discussion. At this point, there are two possible paths. Either Mercedes threatens legal action, strong in the fact that the solution had been approved by the federation beforehand, or the other engine manufacturers are ready to file formal complaints with the stewards. And this is where the FIA puts the brakes on. Tombazis says it bluntly. Formula One must be decided on the track, not in the courts, and not in the stewards' rooms. It cannot become a championship of rule interpretation. It must remain a competition of engineering, driving, and talent, not a race to see who is more cunning. And the stated goal is one only: to resolve everything before the start of the season, before Melbourne. That's why there is talk of a technical solution, like a sensor that measures the hot compression ratio, or more likely a real modification of the regulations, admitting that some rules have been poorly written and left too many gray areas. The FIA does not want a head-on clash, it wants a shared solution, even if getting everyone on the same page today seems almost impossible. In the meantime, however, the track becomes central, because the Bahrain tests will be crucial, because they will show the real state of the power units, and 4 teams use the Mercedes engine. And not everyone will be willing to hide the potential for pretense, and while the timers will start to speak. The most delicate case at the beginning of the 26th era. It will also be discussed in the F1 Commission. The question is now clear, and it doesn't only concern the engines. Will the Formula One of the future choose war or peace? If you want the track to speak, this is sacred. The team's work must speak. The talent, the engineering behind each team. However, it must be done equally for all. There cannot be a team that has gone to exploit an area of the regulations, which is not allowed. Also, because black on white, the compression ratio must be 16:1. The Czechs will carry out static tests, but these are cold on the engine, and this is the wrong point. For this reason, the FIA's decision seems to be to carry out more hot checks on the engines, and thus respecting the wishes of all the engine manufacturers, except Mercedes. So, facing Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull. However, at the same time, it does not effectively prohibit the 18:1 ratio in motion. We also need to see if Mercedes has a plan B ready to devise and implement starting from Melbourne. The fact is that the decision is made by the engine manufacturers. But not only that, it is also made by the F1 Commission. It is also made by the FIA itself, and every team will have a say. So not just the engine manufacturers themselves, but every identity team. Each team will be able to vote in this commission. So, pay attention to how the topic of power units also evolves, because it becomes crucial in an era that has now changed. And the power unit greatly influences who will be the world champion in 2026. On the eve of the tests in Bahrain, a very important piece of news arrived. That froze the paddock for a few hours. Andrea Kimi Antonelli was involved in a car accident, but the most important thing is to say it right away. He is fine and completely unharmed. This was confirmed by Mercedes with an official statement. The incident occurred Saturday evening near his home in San Marino. The police were called directly by Kimi to the scene. No other vehicle was involved. Only his car hit the guardrail. There was a lot of fear, yes, but no physical consequences. The episode took place on the road, on the expressway in the Serravalle area. Initial reports indicate an impact against the barriers without third-party involvement. The dynamics are still under investigation, but the key point remains one. Antonelli will be regularly on track in Bahrain starting tomorrow. We know that Kimi Antonelli and George Russell will take turns during the tests in Bahrain. Both drivers will run on all 3 days. However, they will alternate between morning and afternoon, and also a very important news update from the last few minutes. It is a fact that Ferrari has received the green light from the FIA regarding its use of fuel. In fact, with the introduction of sustainable fuels in 2026, all teams are looking for the right blend to manage sustainability and performance on the track. Only 2 teams have received approval from the FIA regarding their fuel. One of these 2 teams is Ferrari with Shell. Therefore, Ferrari will already be able to start working in the Bahrain tests with the fuel that it will then use during the season. It does not have to make compromises, it does not have to test new blends, but will work and acquire data on this Shell fuel approved by the Federation. Let us know in the comments your opinion on all the topics we covered in the video, from the fact that Ferrari will use the same engine as Barcelona, to Fernando Alonso's statements about Aston Martin, to Adrian Newey, and also on the issue of Nikolas Tombazis regarding the compression report. I am curious to read and respond to all your comments. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos about Formula 1 and Ferrari. That's all from last. See you in the next video.